A deafening crack of splintering wood echoed through the Kansas prairie as the stagecoach lurched violently, sending Bethany Walker's world spinning into chaos. The spring of 1875 had started as a journey of hope, her first trip west to join her ailing aunt in Wilson, but now she found herself trapped in a nightmare as the coach careened down the embankment. "Hold on," the driver shouted just before the final impact. The sickening sensation of falling was followed by a crash that sent Bethany flying from her seat. Her head struck something solid, and pain exploded behind her eyes. The world went black for what could have been seconds or minutes, she couldn't tell. When consciousness returned, it brought with it a symphony of agony. Bethany blinked dust from her eyes, tasting blood on her lips. Sunlight streamed through the shattered window of the overturned coach, illuminating the scene inside. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, lay motionless, their bodies contorted at unnatural angles. The sight made her stomach lurch. "Hello," she called weakly. "Is anyone awake?" Silence answered her. With trembling fingers, she reached for the elderly woman's wrist, searching for a pulse, finding nothing. Tears welled in her eyes as the reality of the situation settled upon her shoulders. She was alone, surrounded by death in a desolate stretch of Kansas prairie. A searing pain shot through her leg when she attempted to move. Looking down, she discovered a deep gash running along her calf, blood soaking her once pristine traveling dress. Her ribs protested with every breath, and her head throbbed mercilessly. But she was alive, and that meant she needed to escape the wreckage. With agonizing effort, Bethany pulled herself toward the door, now above her head since the coach lay on its side. Her fingers clawed at the wood, searching for purchase. She managed to push the door open a few inches before her strength gave out, and she collapsed back onto what had been the coach's wall. "Help," she called, voice cracking. "Is anyone out there, please?" The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as the afternoon sun beat down on the overturned coach, turning it into an oven. Bethany's throat grew parched, her lips cracking from dehydration. Her vision swam in and out of focus. She tried once more to reach the door, but her injured leg gave out beneath her. Through the broken window, she could see the driver's body several yards away, partially hidden by tall grass. The horses were nowhere in sight, likely bolted after the crash. She was truly alone. A wave of despair washed over her. At 22, Bethany had survived the loss of both parents to influenza, managed her father's small bookshop in Boston until its sale, and traveled halfway across a continent to start anew. Would her journey end here, in this anonymous stretch of prairie? As consciousness began to slip away again, the sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fog. At first, she thought it a hallucination, a cruel trick of her desperate mind, but the rhythm grew louder, more distinct. "Hello," she called again, her voice barely audible even to her own ears. "Please help." A shadow fell across the broken window, blocking the harsh sunlight. Bethany squinted upward, barely making out the silhouette of a man against the bright sky. "Good Lord," a deep voice exclaimed. "Anyone alive in there?" "Yes," Bethany managed to whisper. "Please, help me." The shadow shifted, and suddenly the door above was wrenched fully open. A man's face appeared in the opening sun-bronzed skin, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a day's worth of stubble on his strong jaw. "Hold on, miss. I'll get you out." He disappeared momentarily, then returned with a rope that he lowered down to her. "Can you grab hold? I'll pull you up." Bethany reached for the rope but cried out as pain lanced through her side. I cannot," she gasped. "My leg is injured and my ribs." Without hesitation, the man jumped down into the coach beside her, landing with cat-like grace. His presence filled the small space, bringing with it the scent of leather, horses, and open air. "I'm going to lift you," he said, his voice gentle despite its roughness. "It might hurt some, but I need to get you out of here." Bethany nodded weakly as he carefully slid one arm beneath her knees and the other around her shoulders. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, and she couldn't help but gasp as his movement jostled her injuries. "Sorry about that," he murmured. "Almost there." With impressive strength, he managed to boost her through the opening while climbing out himself. The fresh air was a blessing after the stifling confines of the wrecked coach. He laid her carefully on a blanket he'd spread on the ground, then knelt beside her to examine her wounds. "You're in a bad way, miss," he said, frowning at the gash on her leg. "This needs tending and quick." "The others," Bethany whispered. "They didn't. They're all—" "I know," he said quietly. "I checked before I found you. I'm sorry." Tears slipped down her cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. "Where are we? How far from Wilson?" "About 15 miles east," he replied, tearing a strip from his spare bandana to bind her leg. "Too far for you to travel in this condition without proper care." "But my aunt, she's expecting me. She's ill and Wilson can wait," he said firmly, securing the makeshift bandage. "You need a doctor and rest." Bethany tried to sit up but fell back with a cry of pain. The man caught her shoulders, easing her back down. "Easy now," he cautioned. "You've got at least one cracked rib, and that head wound needs looking at." "I don't even know your name," Bethany said, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was with this stranger. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Preston Davis." He tipped his hat slightly. "At your service, miss." "Walker, Bethany Walker." "Miss Walker," he acknowledged with a nod. "Well, I can see you're in a fix and I aim to help." He glanced at the horizon, then back at her. "There's a ranch about 3 miles from here where we can get you fixed up proper. After that—" He paused, his eyes meeting hers directly. "I'll take you anywhere you need to go." The simple promise, delivered with such conviction, brought fresh tears to Bethany's eyes. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Preston's weather-worn face softened. "Out here, we look after folks in trouble. It's how we survive." He stood and whistled sharply. A magnificent chestnut stallion trotted over from where it had been grazing. "Besides, I was headed to Wilson myself. Taking you along won't be any trouble." As Preston carefully gathered her belongings from the wrecked coach, Bethany watched him through pain-hazed eyes. His movements were efficient, his manner confident but gentle. Despite her dire circumstances, she felt an inexplicable sense of security in his presence. "What about the bodies?" she asked hesitantly as he returned to her side. "I'll alert the sheriff when we reach civilization," he assured her. "They'll be tended to properly." With gentle hands, Preston wrapped her in the blanket and lifted her once more. The pain made her dizzy, but she gritted her teeth against it. "I'm going to set you on my horse," he explained. "Then climb up behind you. I'll need to hold you steady if that's all right." Under normal circumstances, Bethany would have balked at such intimate contact with a stranger. But these were not normal circumstances, and she merely nodded her consent. With remarkable care, Preston settled her on his horse, then swung up behind her. One strong arm encircled her waist, holding her securely against his chest while his other hand took the reins. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," she whispered, though in truth she felt anything but ready. As the horse began to move, Bethany's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats, the steady rise and fall of Preston's chest against her back, and the persistent throbbing of her wounds. She fought to stay conscious, knowing that slipping into darkness again might be dangerous. "Talk to me, Miss Walker," Preston urged, seeming to sense her struggle. "Tell me what brings a Boston lady to Kansas." She blinked in surprise. "How did you know I'm from Boston?" A low chuckle rumbled in his chest. Your accent gives you away. Plus, the label in your valise says Walker's Books, Boston, Massachusetts. Despite everything, Bethany found herself smiling faintly. Observant Mr. Davis, in my line of work you learn to notice details. And what is your work? She asked, grateful for the distraction from her pain. I raise horses, he replied. Got a small spread outside Wilson. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. The horse continued its steady pace across the rolling prairie. In the distance, storm clouds gathered, promising rain by nightfall. My Aunt Martha lives in Wilson, Bethany explained, her voice growing weaker. She's my only remaining family. When she wrote that she was ailing, I sold the bookshop and came west. That was brave, Preston commented. Not many Easterners would leave everything behind like that. Not brave, she murmured. Just necessary. Her head lolled against his shoulder as consciousness began to slip away again. Miss Walker, Bethany. Preston's voice seemed to come from very far away. Stay with me now, we're almost there. But the darkness was too inviting, and Bethany surrendered to it, her last conscious thought being the strange comfort she found in a stranger's arms. When awareness returned, she was lying on a soft bed in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through curtained windows, and the air smelled of herbs and fresh linens. A cool cloth rested on her forehead, and her leg had been properly bandaged. Her traveling dress had been replaced with a simple cotton nightgown. "Ah, you're awake," said a woman's voice. Bethany turned her head to see an older woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes sitting beside the bed. "Where am I?" Bethany asked, her throat painfully dry. The woman helped her sip water from a cup before answering. "You're at the Henderson Ranch. I'm Sarah Henderson. My husband Thomas and I own this place." She smiled warmly. "Preston Davis brought you here yesterday afternoon. You were in quite a state." "Yesterday?" Bethany struggled to sit up. "I've been unconscious that long." Sarah gently pressed her back against the pillows. "The doctor gave you laudanum for the pain. Said you needed rest more than anything." She adjusted the blankets. "You've got a nasty gash on your leg that needed stitching, 2 cracked ribs and a concussion. You're lucky to be alive after that accident." "The others weren't so fortunate," Bethany said quietly, Sarah's expression sobered. "No, they weren't. The sheriff's men brought them in last night. They'll be buried in Wilson tomorrow." Bethany closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer for the souls of her fellow passengers. "And Mr. Davis?" She asked after a moment. "Is he still here, Preston?" Sarah's eyes twinkled with something Bethany couldn't quite identify. "He's out helping Thomas with the horses. That man never could sit idle. He'll be pleased to hear you're awake." As if summoned by her words, boots sounded in the hallway and Preston appeared in the doorway. He'd cleaned up since Bethany had last seen him, his face freshly shaved, his dark hair damp and neatly combed. He wore a clean blue shirt and denim trousers held up by suspenders. "Miss Walker," he said, a smile warming his features. "Good to see those eyes open." Something fluttered in Bethany's chest that had nothing to do with her injuries. She attributed it to relief at seeing her rescuer. "Mr. Davis," she acknowledged, "I owe you my life." He shook his head, leaning against the doorframe. "You don't owe me anything. Any decent human would have done the same." "Not everyone would promise to escort a stranger to her destination," Bethany pointed out. Sarah rose from her chair with a knowing smile. "I'll leave you two to talk while I fetch some broth. You need to get your strength back, my dear." Once Sarah had gone, Preston moved to take the chair beside the bed. "The doctor says you'll need at least a week of rest before you should travel again." "A week?" Bethany's heart sank. "But my aunt is being looked after," Preston finished for her. "I rode into Wilson this morning and spoke with Sheriff Mills. He's sending word to your aunt about what happened and that you're safe but injured." Tears of gratitude stung Bethany's eyes. "That was incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." Preston waved away her thanks, looking slightly uncomfortable with her emotion. "It was nothing. I had business in town anyway." "Still," she insisted, "not many would go to such trouble for a stranger." "Well, you're hardly a stranger now, are you?" His gray eyes held hers. "Saved your life, carried you on my horse, waited while the doctor patched you up. I'd say we're at least acquaintances by this point." Despite everything, Bethany found herself laughing, then wincing as her ribs protested. Preston leaned forward in concern, but she waved him off. "I'm fine," she assured him. "It's just been a while since I've had cause to laugh." His expression softened. "Well, Miss Walker, I hope you'll find more reasons in the days to come." Their eyes met and held for a long moment before Sarah returned with a tray bearing a steaming bowl of broth. Preston rose immediately, clearing his throat. "I should get back to Thomas," he said. "Those fence posts won't set themselves." As he moved toward the door, Bethany called after him. "Mr. Davis," he paused, looking back at her with raised eyebrows. "I hope you meant what you said about taking me to Wilson when I'm well enough." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features into something that made her heart skip a beat. "Miss Walker," he said with quiet certainty, "I never make promises I don't intend to keep." With that, he was gone, leaving Bethany with an odd sense of loss that she couldn't quite explain. The next few days passed in a rhythm of rest and recovery. Sarah Henderson proved to be a nurturing caretaker, bringing nourishing meals and helping Bethany wash and change her bandages. The doctor visited twice more, pronouncing her healing well despite the severity of her injuries. Preston came to see her each evening after his work was done. At first, their conversations were brief and somewhat awkward, but gradually they began to share more of themselves. Bethany told him about growing up in her father's bookshop, about her love of literature, and about the grief of losing both parents within months of each other. "Books were my escape," she confessed on the third evening as twilight painted the room in shades of gold and purple. "When reality became too painful, I could disappear into someone else's world for a while." Preston, who had brought a chair closer to her bedside, listened with genuine interest. "What kind of books do you favor?" "All kinds," she replied with enthusiasm. "Though I admit a weakness for adventure stories, tales of far-off places I'll likely never see." "Why not?" he challenged. "World's a big place. No reason you couldn't see parts of it someday." Bethany smiled wistfully. "Perhaps, but for now my adventure is right here in Kansas." "Some might not consider Kansas much of an adventure," Preston remarked, a smile playing at his lips. "A stagecoach crash, a daring rescue by a mysterious horseman, recuperating at a ranch with kind strangers." Bethany ticked off on her fingers. "Sounds like something straight from the pages of a dime novel to me." Preston laughed, the sound rich and warm. "When you put it that way, I suppose it does." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And what of your mysterious horseman? Am I living up to the dime novel standard?" Something in his tone made Bethany's cheeks warm. "Well, you're certainly tall enough," she teased, "and adequately brooding at times." "Brooding?" he protested with mock offense. "Most definitely," she nodded seriously, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Especially when you think no one is watching." Their laughter mingled in the quiet room, creating a moment of connection that felt oddly intimate. When it faded, Preston's expression grew more serious. "What about you, Mr. Davis?" Bethany asked. "You've heard my story, but I know little of yours." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost distant. "Not much to tell. Born in Missouri, father was a blacksmith who taught me to work with horses. Served with the Union during the war cavalry unit. came west afterward looking for a fresh start. He shrugged as if to diminish the significance of his life's journey. Worked as a ranch hand, saved my money, eventually bought my own place. Your parents, Bethany prompted gently. A shadow crossed his face. Gone. Pa died before the war. Ma lasted until 68. Fever took her. I'm sorry, she said, recognizing the familiar pain of loss in his eyes. It was a long time ago. Preston stood and moved to the window, his back to her as he gazed out at the gathering dusk. We all carry our ghosts, I suppose. Bethany sensed there was more to his story, wounds he wasn't ready to reveal. She didn't press him. Will you tell me about your horses? She asked instead. The change of subject visibly relieved him. For the next hour, Preston described his small but growing business breeding and training quarter horses. His face came alive when he spoke of his animals, his hands gesturing expressively as he detailed bloodlines and training methods. You truly love them, Bethany observed when he finally paused for breath. Horses are honest creatures, he replied. They don't pretend to be something they're not. They'll tell you exactly how they feel about you, and they'll give you everything they've got if you treat them right. Unlike people, she suggested perceptively. Preston's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. Some people are honest too, just harder to find. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Sarah appeared at the door to announce dinner, breaking the spell. You should join us tonight, Bethany, she suggested. Dr. Finch said you should start moving about a bit, and I've set a place for you at the table. That sounds wonderful, Bethany agreed eagerly, tired of being confined to bed. Preston helped her stand, his strong hands gentle on her arms. Her injured leg throbbed dully as she put weight on it, but the pain was manageable. With Preston on one side and Sarah on the other, she made her way slowly to the dining room. Thomas Henderson, a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and twinkling eyes, greeted her warmly. The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. Throughout the dinner, Bethany caught Preston watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression thoughtful. After the meal, as Sarah cleared the dishes with Thomas's help, Preston suggested they step out onto the porch for some air. The evening was mild, with a crescent moon hanging low in the sky and a chorus of crickets providing musical accompaniment. How does the leg feel? Preston asked as they settled into rocking chairs. Better each day, Bethany replied. Though I suspect I'll have quite the scar to remember this adventure by. Scars tell our stories, Preston said quietly. They're not something to hide. Do you have many? The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. Instead of taking offense, Preston nodded. My share. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal a jagged white line running from his elbow to his wrist. Took a saber cut at Gettysburg. Without thinking, Bethany reached out to trace the scar with her fingertips. His skin was warm beneath her touch, and she felt his muscles tense slightly. I'm sorry, she said, withdrawing her hand quickly. That was terribly forward of me. No need to apologize, Preston assured her, though his voice sounded slightly strained. It was a long time ago. They fell into companionable silence, rocking gently as the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. Do you miss Boston? Preston asked eventually. Bethany considered the question. I miss certain aspects of it. The bookshops, the libraries, the bustle of a big city. But there was nothing left for me there, not really. She gazed up at the vast expanse of stars, more than she'd ever seen in Boston's light-polluted skies. And there's a beauty here that I never experienced back east, a sense of possibility. Possibility, Preston repeated as if testing the word. I like that. A cool breeze stirred Bethany's hair and she shivered slightly. Immediately, Preston removed his coat and draped it around her shoulders. "Thank you," she murmured, wrapping it closer around herself. His scent enveloped her leather soap, and something uniquely him. "We should get you back inside," he suggested. "You're still healing." As he helped her to her feet, their faces came close together, so close she could see the faint scar on his chin, the individual lashes framing his gray eyes. For a heartbeat, she thought he might lean forward, close the distance between them. Instead, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it," he said as they walked slowly back to the door. "I thought you might like to see the horses. Fresh air would do you good." The prospect brightened Bethany's spirits. "I'd like that very much." That night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant howl of a coyote, Bethany found her thoughts continually returning to Preston Davis. His quiet strength, his kindness, the moments when something vulnerable flashed in his eyes before being quickly hidden away. She told herself it was natural to feel a connection to the man who had saved her life, but deep down, she suspected it was becoming something more. The next morning brought clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect for Bethany's first real venture outdoors since the accident. Sarah helped her dress in a borrowed skirt and shirtwaist that hung a bit loose on her frame. "You've lost weight," Sarah observed with concern. "We'll need to fatten you up before you continue your journey. At this rate, I fear I'll be imposing on your hospitality for quite some time," Bethany said, feeling guilty about the burden she must be placing on the older couple. Sarah waved away her concerns. "Nonsense. It's a joy having another woman around. This house has been too quiet since our daughters married and moved away." She patted Bethany's hand. "Besides, it's nice seeing Preston with a smile on his face for a change." Before Bethany could inquire about what Sarah meant, Preston appeared at the door, hat in hand. "Ready for that tour, Miss Walker?" His eyes took in her appearance, lingering briefly on her face before politely shifting away. "More than ready, Mr. Davis," she replied, accepting the walking stick Thomas had fashioned for her from a sturdy branch. Preston offered his arm for support as they made their way slowly across the yard toward the corral. Bethany was painfully aware of the solid strength of him beside her, the way his body instinctively adjusted to accommodate her halting pace. "The limp will fade with time," he assured her, misreading her tension. "My cousin took a similar injury from a cattle drive, and within months you'd never know it happened." "I'm not concerned about the limp," Bethany replied honestly. "I'm just grateful to be alive and walking at all." They reached the fence, where several horses grazed or dozed in the morning sun. Preston whistled softly, and a magnificent chestnut stallion lifted its head, then trotted over to them. "This is Rusty," Preston said with evident pride. "He's the one who carried us here." "He's beautiful," Bethany breathed, admiring the horse's glossy coat and intelligent eyes. She reached out hesitantly to stroke his velvety nose. "Thank you for the ride, Rusty, though I'm afraid I wasn't much company at the time," Preston chuckled. "He understands more than you'd think, don't you, boy?" The horse nudged Preston's shoulder affectionately, then extended the same courtesy to Bethany, making her laugh. "I've never been this close to a horse before," she admitted. "In Boston, they were always pulling carriages or carts, never just being horses." "That's a shame," Preston said, scratching behind Rusty's ears. "There's no finer creature on God's earth, in my opinion. I can see why you feel that way." Bethany continued stroking the horse's nose, delighting in the soft, wuffling sounds he made. For the next hour, Preston introduced her to each of his horses, explaining their lineage, temperament, and special qualities. His knowledge was extensive, his passion obvious in every word. Bethany found herself captivated not just by the magnificent animals, but by the man who cared for them with such dedication. They were sitting on a bench near the corral, resting Bethany's leg, when Thomas called to Preston from the barn. "Excuse me a moment," Preston said, rising. "Will you be all right here?" "Perfectly fine," she assured him. "Take your time." As he strode away, Bethany watched the easy grace of his movement, the confidence in his bearing. Something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling she wasn't quite ready to name. Sarah joined her a few minutes later, bringing a pitcher of lemonade and 2 glasses. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, pouring the cool drink and handing a glass to Bethany. "Thank you. It's delicious." Bethany sipped gratefully, realizing how parched she'd become in the morning sun. Sarah settled beside her on the bench, her eyes following Preston and Thomas as they examined a piece of tack near the barn entrance. "He's a good man," Sarah said after a moment. "One of the best I know." Bethany didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes, I believe he is." "Life hasn't always been kind to him," Sarah continued, her voice taking on a confidential tone. "The war left scars that aren't all visible on the outside, if you take my meaning." Bethany nodded, recalling the moments when shadows seemed to cross Preston's face for no apparent reason. After he came west, he kept mostly to himself. Built his ranch, focused on his horses. "Thomas and I are about the closest thing to family he has out here." Sarah glanced at Bethany with knowing eyes. "This is the first time in years I've seen him take such an interest in anyone." Heat rose in Bethany's cheeks. "Mrs. Henderson, Sarah, please," the older woman corrected gently. "And I'm not saying this to embarrass you, child. I just want you to understand. Some hearts take longer to open up, but when they do, they're worth the wait." Before Bethany could respond, Preston returned and Sarah rose with a smile. "I'll leave you young folks to your conversation," she said, gathering the empty glasses. "Dinner will be ready at noon." Preston watched her go with a suspicious expression. "What was that about?" "Just getting to know each other," Bethany replied evasively. "She's been very kind to me." "The Hendersons are good people," Preston agreed, reclaiming his seat beside her. "They took me in when I first came to Kansas, gave me work when I needed it most." "How long have you had your own ranch?" Bethany asked. 5 years now," he answered. "Started with just 10 acres and 3 horses. Now I've got 40 acres and a breeding stock of 12, plus Rusty and my workhorse Samson." "That's impressive," Bethany said sincerely. "You've built something meaningful." Preston's expression softened. "It's a good life, simple but good." He hesitated, then added, "Sometimes, though, it can be a lonely one." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of similar wounds, similar longings. The moment stretched, taut with possibility. "Miss Walker, Bethany," Preston began, his voice low. "I know we haven't known each other long, but—" Thomas's call from the house interrupted whatever he had been about to say. "Dinner's ready, you two." Preston closed his eyes briefly, looking almost relieved at the interruption. He stood and offered his arm once more. "Shall we?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral again. Bethany took his arm, trying to ignore the disappointment that fluttered in her chest. "Lead the way, Mr. Davis." The next few days fell into a pleasant routine. Bethany grew stronger, able to walk greater distances with less pain. Each morning, Preston would escort her around the ranch, showing her the various aspects of ranch life. In the afternoons, she would rest or help Sarah with light chores, and in the evenings, she and Preston would sit on the porch, talking until the stars came out. She learned about his dreams for expanding his ranch, his hopes of someday breeding horses that would be sought after throughout the territory. He, in turn, listened attentively as she described her plans to help her aunt and perhaps open a small bookshop in Wilson. "There's not much call for books out here," he cautioned when she shared this idea. "All the more reason to provide them," Bethany countered. "Every child should have the chance to discover worlds beyond their own experience." Preston smiled at her enthusiasm. "You'd make a fine teacher." The thought had never occurred to Bethany before, but it took root in her mind. "Do you think Wilson needs a teacher?" "I know they do," he replied. "The schoolmarm left last winter to get married, and they've been making do with the preacher's wife filling in. But she's expecting a baby soon, so they've been looking for someone permanent." Possibilities bloomed in Bethany's imagination. "I've never considered teaching before, but I do love literature and history. And children, of course." "You should speak to Mayor Hoffman when we get to Wilson," Preston suggested. "I could introduce you." "I'd appreciate that," Bethany said, warming to the idea, "though I should see to my aunt first." "Of course," Preston agreed. "Family comes first." The word family hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken thoughts. Bethany wondered what it would be like to have a family of her own someday, a husband, children, a home filled with love and laughter. For the first time since leaving Boston, the future seemed to hold promise rather than merely obligation. On the 7th day after the accident, Dr. Finch pronounced Bethany fit enough to travel. "The stitches can come out in another week," he instructed as he packed his medical bag. "Keep the wound clean and dry and try not to overexert yourself." "When can we leave for Wilson?" Bethany asked, looking from the doctor to Preston, who stood nearby. "Tomorrow would be safe enough if the weather holds," Dr. Finch replied. "It's a half-day's journey at a gentle pace." After the doctor departed, Preston turned to Bethany with an unreadable expression. "So, tomorrow then?" "Yes," she said, suddenly feeling strangely bereft at the thought of leaving the Henderson ranch and the daily companionship of Preston. "I'll hitch up Thomas's wagon," Preston said after a moment. "It'll be more comfortable for you than riding horseback again." "Thank you," Bethany said softly, "for everything." His eyes met hers, and for a moment she thought he might say something more. Instead, he simply nodded and left the room. That night after dinner, Sarah helped Bethany pack her few belongings. The older woman worked in silence for a while before finally speaking what was clearly on her mind. "You know, Wilson isn't far," she said casually. "Only about 15 miles. Easy enough to visit back and forth." Bethany smiled at Sarah's transparent matchmaking. "I'll certainly come to visit you and Thomas. You've been so kind to me." Sarah folded a shawl with deliberate care. "Preston's place is on the way, just about halfway between here and Wilson." "Convenient, wouldn't you say, Mrs. Henderson?" Bethany began, then corrected herself. "Sarah, I'm not sure what you're implying, but Mr. Davis and I are merely friends." "Are you now?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Then why does he look at you when he thinks no one is watching? And why do you blush every time he enters a room?" Bethany had no answer for that. Sarah patted her hand gently. "Love isn't something that follows a proper Boston timetable, my dear. Sometimes it happens in an instant. I knew Thomas was the man I'd marry the very day I met him, though it took him months to work up the courage to court me properly." "I barely know him," Bethany protested weakly. "You know his character," Sarah countered. "You know his heart. The rest is just details to be discovered over time." Later, as Bethany prepared for bed, Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Did she know Preston's heart? Perhaps not entirely, but she recognized the essential goodness in him, the quiet strength, the tender care he took with those in his charge, whether horses or injured strangers. And what of her own heart? The answer came with surprising clarity. In the space of a week, Preston Davis had claimed a place there that no man had occupied before. Sleep proved elusive that night. Bethany tossed restlessly, her thoughts churning with uncertainty about what awaited her in Wilson. Would her aunt welcome her? Would she find fulfillment there? And what would become of this fragile connection she'd formed with Preston once they parted ways? Dawn was just breaking when she finally drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be awakened a few hours later by Sarah's gentle knock at the door. "Breakfast is ready, dear," she called, "and Preston's got the wagon hitched up whenever you're ready to depart." Breakfast was a subdued affair. Thomas told jokes to lighten the mood, but an undercurrent of melancholy pervaded the meal. When it was time to leave, Sarah hugged Bethany tightly. "You come back and see us," she insisted, blinking away tears. "And don't be a stranger." "I won't," Bethany promised, her own eyes welling up. "Thank you for everything." Thomas embraced her next, his bare hug careful of her still tender ribs. "You're always welcome here, girl. Remember that." Preston loaded Bethany's valise into the wagon, then helped her up to the seat. Sarah had packed a basket of food for their journey, along with a canteen of fresh water. The day was clear and mild, perfect for traveling. As they pulled away from the ranch, Bethany looked back to see Sarah and Thomas waving from the porch. A lump formed in her throat at the sight. "They're good people," Preston said, seeming to read her thoughts. "The best," Bethany agreed, wiping away a stray tear. For the first hour of their journey, they rode in companionable silence. The prairie stretched around them, vast and beautiful in the morning light. Occasionally, Preston would point out a hawk circling overhead or a distant herd of antelope. "I never imagined the West would be so beautiful," Bethany commented as they paused to rest the horses near a small creek. "In Boston, people speak of it as a wild, dangerous place." "It can be that too," Preston acknowledged, helping her down from the wagon. "But there's a freedom here you won't find back east. Room to breathe, to become who you're meant to be." They sat on a fallen log near the creek, sharing the bread and cheese Sarah had packed. "Is that what you found here?" Bethany asked. "Who you were meant to be?" Preston considered the question, his eyes on the rippling water. "I found peace, at least. After the war, that seemed impossible." He glanced at her. "What about you? What are you looking for in Wilson?" "I came for my aunt," Bethany replied. "But now, I'm not sure. Perhaps a new beginning." "Beginnings are good," Preston said softly, "full of possibility." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Preston leaned forward slightly, then hesitated. "Bethany?" The distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Preston was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip that Bethany hadn't even realized he carried. "Stay here," he instructed, his tone suddenly all business. 3 riders appeared on the crest of a small hill, moving toward them at a steady pace. Preston relaxed slightly as they drew closer. "It's all right," he told Bethany. "I recognize them, ranchers from north of Wilson." The riders approached and exchanged greetings with Preston. They were weather-beaten men with friendly eyes who tipped their hats respectfully to Bethany. "Heard about the stage accident," the oldest of the 3 said. "Terrible business. You heading to Wilson now, miss?" "Yes," Bethany confirmed. "To my aunt's home." "Who might your aunt be?" asked another of the men. "Martha Walker," she replied. "She lives on Elm Street, I believe." The men exchanged glances that made Bethany's heart sink. "What is it?" she asked, dreading the answer. The oldest man removed his hat. "Miss, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your aunt passed away 3 days ago. Pneumonia took her quick from what I heard. The funeral was yesterday." The world seemed to tilt beneath Bethany's feet. Preston was beside her instantly, his hand steady on her arm. "Are you certain?" he asked the men, his voice tight. "Yes, sir," the rider confirmed. "The whole town turned out for it. She was well liked, Miss Walker was." Bethany sank back onto the log, her mind struggling to process this new reality. She had come all this way, survived a deadly accident, only to arrive too late. "I'm truly sorry for your loss, miss," the oldest rider said gently. "If there's anything we can do." Preston thanked the men, and they soon continued on their way, leaving Bethany and Preston alone by the creek once more. "Bethany," Preston knelt before her, his eyes full of concern. "I'm so sorry." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I never even got to say goodbye. She was my only family, and now—" "What do you want to do?" he asked after a moment. "We can still go to Wilson if you wish. There will be arrangements to make, I expect." Bethany nodded numbly. "Yes, I should go. Her house, her belongings. Someone will need to see to them." "Then we'll continue," Preston said, helping her to her feet. "But know this, you're not alone, Bethany, not as long as I'm here." The simple promise, offered with such sincerity, was her undoing. Bethany broke down, weeping against Preston's chest as he held her, one hand stroking her hair while the other arm supported her firmly. "I've got you," he murmured against the top of her head. "I've got you." When her tears finally subsided, Bethany drew back, embarrassed by her display of emotion. "I'm sorry. I've soaked your shirt." "It'll dry," he said with a gentle smile, producing a handkerchief from his pocket. "Here." She took it gratefully, wiping her eyes and attempting to compose herself. "We should continue. It's still a long way to Wilson." Preston studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "If you're sure." The remainder of the journey passed in relative silence, Bethany lost in thoughts of her aunt and the uncertain future that now stretched before her. What would she do now? Return to Boston? Stay in Wilson? Both options seemed equally daunting. As they crested a hill in the early afternoon, the town of Wilson came into view, a cluster of buildings nestled along a winding creek, smoke rising from chimneys, the white steeple of a church standing tall above the other structures. "There it is," Preston said, drawing the wagon to a halt. Wilson. Bethany gazed at the town that had been her destination for so long. Instead of the sense of arrival she had anticipated, she felt only a hollow ache. "It looks like a nice place," she said, trying to muster enthusiasm. Preston glanced at her, his expression troubled. "Bethany, I know this isn't what you planned, but, well, there are good people in Wilson. You could make a life here if you wanted to." "Perhaps," she said softly, not entirely convinced. They continued down the hill and into the town proper. Wilson was larger than Bethany had expected. Several streets of buildings, including a general store, a bank, a hotel, and various shops. People moved about their business, pausing occasionally to look curiously at the newcomers. Preston guided the wagon to a stop in front of a small, neat house with a white picket fence. A wreath of black crepe hung on the door, a somber confirmation of what the riders had told them. "Is this—" Bethany couldn't quite finish the question. "Your aunt's house," Preston confirmed gently. "From the description you gave me." For a long moment, Bethany couldn't bring herself to move. The finality of seeing the house, the wreath, made her aunt's passing real in a way that mere words hadn't. "Would you like me to come in with you?" Preston offered, his voice soft. Bethany nodded, grateful beyond words for his steady presence. As they approached the gate, the front door opened, and an elderly woman stepped out onto the porch. She peered at them through spectacles, then hurried down the steps with surprising agility. "You must be Bethany," she called. "Oh, my dear, we've been so worried. When you didn't arrive on the stage and then we heard about the accident." "I was injured," Bethany explained as the woman reached them. "Mr. Davis rescued me and took me to the Henderson Ranch to recover." "Preston Davis." The woman looked at him with new interest. "Well, bless my soul, I've heard good things about you, young man." She turned back to Bethany, taking her hands. "I'm Ida Widhaker, your aunt's dearest friend. I've been looking after things since we lost her." "Thank you," Bethany said sincerely. "I'm sorry I wasn't here in time." "Nonsense," Ida said firmly. "You came as soon as you could. Martha understood that. She spoke of you often, you know, so proud that her niece was coming to live with her." Fresh tears stung Bethany's eyes at the thought of her aunt waiting for her, perhaps growing weaker each day, hoping to see her niece one last time. "Come inside," Ida urged, leading them toward the house. "You look exhausted, child. And you, Mr. Davis, will you stay for tea?" "If it's no trouble," Preston replied, his hand coming to rest supportively at the small of Bethany's back as they climbed the porch steps. The interior of the house was modest, but comfortable, clean, well furnished, with shelves of books lining one wall of the sitting room. Bethany moved toward them instinctively, running her fingers along the spines. "She kept every book you ever sent her," Ida said, watching Bethany's reaction. "Read them all, too, more than once. Said it made her feel close to you." Bethany smiled through her tears, pulling out a volume of Tennyson's poems that she had sent for her aunt's birthday 2 years prior. The pages were well thumbed, with small notes in her aunt's handwriting in the margins. "I'll put the kettle on," Ida said, moving toward the kitchen. "Make yourselves comfortable." When she had gone, Preston moved to stand beside Bethany at the bookshelf. "She seems to have been a woman of taste," he observed, nodding toward the books. "Like her niece." "I wish I'd known her better," Bethany said softly. "Our correspondence was regular, but there's so much I never got to ask her, never got to share with her." Preston's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "I'm sorry, Bethany." They stood that way, hands clasped, until Ida returned with a tea tray. Over tea and fresh-baked scones, she filled Bethany in on the details of her aunt's final days and the arrangements that had been made. "She went peacefully," Ida assured her. "And she wasn't alone. I was with her, reading from one of your letters, actually." "Thank you for being there," Bethany said, deeply touched. "As for the house and her belongings," Ida continued, "Martha left everything to you, of course. The solicitor has the will. You can see him tomorrow if you're up to it." The reality of her new situation began to sink in. Bethany now owned a house in Wilson, a town where she knew no one, except the elderly woman sitting across from her and the cowboy at her side. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted, looking around the cozy sitting room. "I came here to care for my aunt, but now—" "Now you have choices," Preston said quietly. "You could return to Boston, or—" He hesitated, then continued, "or you could stay in Wilson, make a life here." "Martha would have wanted that," Ida added earnestly, "for you to be happy wherever that might be." After tea, Preston announced that he should be getting back to his ranch before dark. "I've imposed on Thomas's hospitality long enough," he explained. "He'll be wanting his wagon back." Bethany walked him to the door, suddenly anxious at the thought of his departure. "Will I see you again?" she asked, trying to keep the emotion from her voice. Preston's eyes softened as he looked down at her. "If you'd like to." "I would," she said simply. "Then you will," he promised. "I could come by tomorrow, help you with anything you need." "I'd appreciate that," Bethany said, relieved. At the doorway, Preston hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek briefly. "Try to get some rest, Bethany. It's been a long day." After he had gone, Bethany returned to the sitting room to find Ida gathering the tea things. "That's a good man," the older woman said, nodding toward the door Preston had just exited. "The way he looks at you reminds me of how my Harold used to look at me." "Mrs. Whittaker, Ida, please." "Ida," Bethany corrected herself. "Mr. Davis and I are merely friends." "If you say so, dear," Ida replied with a knowing smile. "Now, would you like me to stay tonight? The spare room is made up." Grateful for the offer, Bethany accepted. The thought of spending her first night in her aunt's house alone was too daunting. That evening, after a simple supper, Bethany explored the house that was now hers. In the small bedroom that would have been hers had her aunt lived, she found a patchwork quilt laid out on the bed and a vase of fresh wildflowers on the dresser, touches that spoke of her aunt's anticipation of her arrival. In her aunt's bedroom, preserved exactly as she had left it, Bethany discovered a diary in the nightstand drawer. She hesitated, unsure if reading it would be an invasion of privacy, but her desire to know her aunt better won out. The final entry, dated just 5 days before her death, made Bethany weep anew. Still no word from Bethany. The stage was due yesterday. I pray she is safe. My cough is worse today, but Dr. Evans says not to worry. I am so looking forward to having my dear niece here. There is so much I want to tell her, so many memories to share. And perhaps, God willing, I will see her find happiness here, maybe even love. Wilson has several eligible young men, though none so fine as Harold was. But who knows? The Lord works in mysterious ways, and Bethany deserves every happiness after all she has endured. Bethany closed the diary, clutching it to her chest as tears slid down her cheeks. Even in her final days, her aunt had been thinking of her future, her happiness. "I'll try, Aunt Martha," she whispered into the quiet room. "I'll try to find happiness here for both of us." The next morning, Ida helped Bethany dress for her appointment with the solicitor. The black mourning dress that Ida had thoughtfully provided was a bit large, but it would serve until Bethany could have one made. "The dressmaker, Mrs. Chen, is very skilled," Ida informed her as she pinned the dress at the waist. "She came all the way from San Francisco 2 years ago when she married our blacksmith. Quite the scandal at first, but they're very happy together, and now everyone adores her." Bethany listened with interest as Ida continued to share details of Wilson's residence, the mayor, and his ambitious wife, the young doctor who had cared for her aunt, the schoolchildren who needed a teacher. It painted a picture of a vibrant community, diverse and evolving, not the rough frontier town she had imagined. They were just finishing breakfast when a knock sounded at the door. Ida answered it to find Preston standing on the porch, hat in hand, freshly shaved and wearing what appeared to be his Sunday best. "Good morning, Mrs. Whittaker," he greeted her. "I've come to escort Miss Walker to her appointments if she's ready." Ida ushered him in with obvious approval. "My, don't you look handsome today, Mr. Davis. Bethany will be right out." When Bethany entered the room, Preston's expression of admiration made her momentarily forget her grief. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "Though I feel like I'm swimming in this dress." "Mrs. Chen can fix that," he assured her. "I've put in a word with her already. She'll see you this afternoon if you'd like." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Bethany deeply. "That's very kind of you." Preston offered his arm. "Shall we?" The solicitor's office opens at 9. The morning passed in a blur of paperwork and explanations. Mr. Jenkins, the solicitor, confirmed that Bethany had indeed inherited everything. Her aunt owned the house, a small sum of money, and a few acres of land outside town. "Your aunt was a prudent woman," Mr. Jenkins explained as Bethany signed the necessary documents. "She invested wisely in local businesses and property. You won't be wealthy, Miss Walker, but you'll be comfortable if you manage it well." Next came a visit to the bank to transfer accounts to Bethany's name, then to the land office to record the deed to the house and property. Throughout it all, Preston remained by her side, offering quiet support and occasionally clarifying points about local customs or practices that were unfamiliar to her. As they walked down the main street toward Mrs. Chen's dress shop, Bethany became aware of curious glances from townsfolk. Preston greeted many by name, introducing Bethany as Miss Walker, Martha's niece from Boston. "Everyone seems to know you," Bethany observed after one such exchange. Preston shrugged modestly. "It's a small town, and I do business here regularly." Before they reached the dress shop, an older gentleman with a silver mustache hailed them from across the street. "Davis," A moment of your time, if you please." Preston guided Bethany across to meet the man, whom he introduced as Mayor Hoffman. "Miss Walker," the mayor said, taking her hand warmly. "I'm terribly sorry about your aunt. She was a fine woman and a valued member of our community." "Thank you, Mayor Hoffman," Bethany replied. "I'm touched by how well loved she seems to have been." "Indeed she was," the mayor agreed. He glanced at Preston, then back to Bethany. "I understand you're settling her affairs. Do you plan to stay in Wilson long?" Bethany hesitated, still uncertain. "I haven't decided yet." The mayor nodded thoughtfully. "Well, should you decide to make Wilson your home, I hope you'll consider a proposition. Our school is in need of a teacher, and Preston here mentioned you might have the qualifications." Surprised, Bethany looked at Preston, who gave her an encouraging smile. "I told the mayor about your background in literature and your experience working in your father's bookshop," he explained. "He agreed you might be just what Wilson needs." "I've never taught before," Bethany admitted to the mayor. "But you're educated, cultured, and from what Preston tells me, passionate about books and learning," Mayor Hoffman countered. "Those are qualities we value highly. The position comes with a modest salary and a small apartment above the schoolhouse, though you have your aunt's house now, of course." The offer was unexpected but intriguing. Teaching was something Bethany had never considered as a career, yet the idea held immediate appeal. Would it be possible to visit the school before I decide?" she asked. "Of course," the mayor beamed. "How about tomorrow morning?" "School's in session until noon, and Mrs. Hoffman would be delighted to introduce you to the children." With the matter arranged, Bethany and Preston continued to Mrs. Chen's shop. The petite Chinese woman welcomed them warmly, clucking sympathetically about Bethany's ill-fitting morning dress. "I fix for you," she promised, already taking measurements. "Ready by tomorrow, and make new dresses too, yes. Pretty lady needs pretty clothes." By the time they left the shop, Bethany felt slightly overwhelmed by the rapid pace of developments. In the space of a morning, she had become a property owner, a prospective schoolteacher, and the recipient of more kindness from strangers than she had experienced in years in Boston. "It's a lot to take in," Preston observed as they walked back toward her aunt's her house. "Are you all right?" "I think so," Bethany replied honestly. "It's just, everything is happening so quickly." Preston led her to a small cafe where they could have lunch and talk privately. Over bowls of savory stew and fresh bread, he listened as she sorted through her thoughts and feelings. "Part of me feels I should return to Boston," she confessed. "It's what I know, but there's nothing really waiting for me there. No family, no home of my own." "And here," Preston prompted gently, "here I have a house, possibly a position teaching, which I find myself rather excited about." She met his eyes across the table. "And I have friends." Something flickered in Preston's gaze at the word friends, but he merely nodded. "Wilson's a good town, Bethany, growing, changing. You could be part of that." "What would you do," she asked suddenly, "if you were in my position?" Preston considered the question carefully before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "I'd give Wilson a chance, see if it could become home." His words resonated with something deep inside her, a longing for home, for belonging that had been with her since her parents' deaths. "Perhaps I will," she said softly. The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Preston took her to meet various townspeople, the doctor who had tended her aunt, the preacher and his wife, the general store owner who had special ordered books for her aunt from Denver. Everywhere they went, Bethany was greeted with warmth and sympathy. By the time Preston escorted her back to her house, where Ida had promised to have supper waiting, Bethany felt emotionally exhausted but strangely hopeful. "Thank you for today," she said as they paused at her gate. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." "You'd have managed just fine," Preston replied with a smile. "You're stronger than you realize, Bethany Walker." The conviction in his voice made her stand a little straighter. "Will you join us for supper?" she asked, not ready for his company to end. Preston shook his head regretfully. "I should get back to my ranch. The horses need tending and I've been away too long already." Disappointment washed over Bethany, though she tried not to show it. "Of course. Your responsibilities come first." "I'll come by tomorrow, though," he promised. "Take you to see the school if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," she said, brightening. For a moment they stood facing each other in the golden light of the setting sun, neither seeming willing to say goodbye. Then, with gentle deliberation, Preston took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Until tomorrow, Bethany," he murmured against her skin. The gesture, so formal yet somehow intimate, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. "Until tomorrow, Preston," she echoed, using his given name for the first time. As she watched him walk away, Bethany felt a certainty settle over her like a warm blanket. Whatever her future held, Wilson and perhaps Preston Davis would be part of it. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Bethany awoke feeling more rested than she had in weeks, despite the lingering sadness of her aunt's passing. Perhaps it was the decision she had made during the night, after hours of reflection. She would stay in Wilson, at least long enough to give it a fair chance. Mrs. Chen arrived early with the altered morning dress and measurements for new ones. "You have good figure," she declared approvingly. "Easy to make pretty clothes for you." Ida appeared shortly thereafter with fresh bread and preserves for breakfast. "I've spread the word that you're considering staying," she announced as she set the table. "Everyone's quite excited, especially about you possibly teaching at the school." "News travels fast," Bethany observed, amused. "Faster than the telegraph in Wilson," Ida confirmed with a chuckle. Preston arrived promptly at 8:30, looking slightly more casual than the previous day but still meticulously groomed. The sight of him on her porch, hat in hand, made Bethany's heart beat a little faster. "Ready to meet your potential students?" he asked with a smile. The schoolhouse was a simple white clapboard building at the edge of town, with a bell tower and a small yard where children played before lessons began. As Bethany and Preston approached, the children ceased their games to stare curiously. "Miss Walker." Mayor Hoffman called from the schoolhouse steps. Beside him stood a plump, pleasant-faced woman whom he introduced as his wife, Eleanor. "Welcome to Wilson School. Children, gather round and meet Miss Walker." 24 children, ranging from about 6 to 16 years of age, formed a semicircle around Bethany. Their expressions ranged from shy curiosity to open interest. "Miss Walker is considering becoming your new teacher," Mrs. Hoffman explained to them. "She's come all the way from Boston to live here in Wilson." "What's Boston like?" asked a freckle-faced boy of about 10. "It's a big city near the ocean," Bethany replied, "with tall buildings and ships from all over the world in the harbor." "Have you seen a real whale?" inquired a tiny girl with pigtails. Bethany smiled. "I have, actually. Once when I was about your age, a whale swam right into Boston Harbor. The whole city came out to see it." The children's eyes widened with wonder, and Bethany found herself warming to their earnest curiosity. For the next hour, she observed Mrs. Hoffman teaching reading to the younger children while the older ones worked on mathematics problems. When Mrs. Hoffman invited her to read a story aloud, Bethany chose The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, modulating her voice for different characters and holding the children spellbound. "You're a natural," Mrs. Hoffman whispered as the children worked on drawings inspired by the story. "They already adore you." When it was time to leave, several children begged Bethany to return the next day. "Please say you'll be our teacher, Miss Walker." urged a serious-eyed girl of about 12. I'm strongly considering it, Bethany told them honestly. You're a wonderful group of students. Outside, Preston waited, having excused himself during the lessons to attend to some business in town. The expression on his face when he saw Bethany emerge, flushed with enthusiasm, was one of undisguised admiration. "Well," he asked as they walked back toward town, "what did you think?" "They're delightful," Bethany replied, her eyes shining. "So eager to learn, so curious about everything. And the school itself is well equipped, thanks to Mrs. Hoffman's fundraising efforts." "Does that mean you're accepting the position?" Preston asked, a note of hope in his voice. Bethany nodded decisively. "Yes, I believe I am. It feels right somehow." Preston's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I think so too." They celebrated her decision with lunch at the hotel dining room, where Preston was greeted by name by the proprietor, who insisted on serving them the very best steak in Kansas, on the house. "Everyone seems determined to welcome me," Bethany observed as they enjoyed their meal. "Wilson takes care of its own," Preston replied. "And you're one of us now." The simple statement filled Bethany with a sense of belonging she hadn't felt since before her parents' deaths. After lunch, Preston suggested they ride out to see the land Bethany had inherited from her aunt. "It's only a few miles outside town," he explained. "Good grazing land with a stream running through it. Your aunt leased it to neighboring ranchers, but the lease expires next month." "I know nothing about ranching," Bethany confessed as Preston helped her into a rented buggy. "You wouldn't have to ranch it yourself," he said. "You could renew the lease or—" He hesitated. "Or what?" she prompted. "Or sell it if you wished," Preston finished, though something in his tone suggested that wasn't what he had been about to say. The land, when they reached it, was indeed beautiful rolling hills covered in lush grass, with a clear stream winding through a small valley. Wildflowers dotted the landscape, and a stand of cottonwood trees provided shade near the water. "It's lovely," Bethany breathed as Preston helped her down from the buggy. "It is," he agreed, looking around appreciatively. "Your aunt had a good eye for land." They walked along the stream, Preston pointing out various features of the property and explaining how it connected to neighboring ranches, including, Bethany realized, his own. "Your land borders mine?" she asked, surprised. Preston nodded, pointing to a ridge in the distance. "My eastern boundary runs along that rise. Our properties share about a mile of this stream." "So we're neighbors," Bethany said, smiling at the thought. "In a manner of speaking," Preston replied, returning her smile. They found a flat rock beside the stream and sat, enjoying the peaceful setting and the gentle sound of flowing water. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the occasional call of a meadowlark or the distant lowing of cattle. "I've been thinking," Preston said eventually, his voice unusually hesitant, "about what you said yesterday about having friends here in Wilson." "Yes," Bethany prompted when he didn't continue. Preston turned to face her, his expression serious. "Bethany, I hope you know that I consider you more than just a friend." Her heart quickened at his words, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I know we haven't known each other long," he went on, "and maybe this is too forward of me, but these past days with you have been the happiest I've had in years." "Preston, please, let me finish," he requested gently. "I'm not asking for anything right now. I understand you're still grieving, still adjusting to life here. But I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to court you properly." The directness of his declaration took Bethany's breath away. In Boston, romantic overtures were typically made through much more circuitous paths, with carefully worded notes and chaperoned visits. But there was something refreshingly honest about Preston's approach that resonated with her. "I'd like that," she said simply, meeting his eyes with newfound courage. "Very much." The smile that spread across Preston's face was like watching the sun rise. With slow deliberation, he reached out to take her hand in his. "Then I'll wait," he promised, "until you tell me you're ready." The touch of his hand, warm and calloused against her own, sent a current of awareness through Bethany that made her previous infatuations seem pale and insignificant by comparison. This was something entirely new, a connection that seemed to bridge not just the physical space between them, but something deeper, more essential. They remained by the stream for another hour, talking about everything and nothing: his plans for his ranch, her ideas for the school, books they had read, places they hoped to see someday. When they finally returned to town, Bethany felt as though something fundamental had shifted in her world, realigning it around this new possibility between them. The following weeks fell into a pattern that gradually began to feel like normal life. Bethany took up her position as Wilson's schoolteacher, quickly winning the hearts of her students and their parents with her enthusiasm and innovative teaching methods. She established a small lending library in one corner of the schoolroom, contributing many of her aunt's books and writing to her connections in Boston for more. In the evenings and on weekends, she divided her time between settling her aunt's affairs, making improvements to her house, and becoming acquainted with the community. Ida remained a steadfast friend and guide, introducing her to the social customs of Wilson and helping her navigate her new role. And then there was Preston. True to his word, he didn't press for more than friendship, but he was a constant presence in her life. He would ride into town several times a week, often bringing small gifts: wildflowers, a book he thought she might enjoy, once even a kitten he had rescued from a storm drain. They would walk together, talk for hours, occasionally join other townsfolk for social gatherings at the church or town hall. On Sundays, he would escort her to services, then to dinner at the hotel or a picnic by the creek if the weather was fine. Gradually, the townspeople began to regard them as a pair, though no formal understanding had been declared. 6 weeks after her arrival in Wilson, as summer blossomed across the prairie, Bethany realized 2 things. She had found a home in this small Kansas town, and she was irrevocably in love with Preston Davis. The realization came to her one evening as she sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Preston had ridden back to his ranch that afternoon after helping her plant a vegetable garden behind her house. The day had been filled with laughter and comfortable companionship, but as she watched him ride away, Bethany had felt a longing so acute it was almost painful. She wanted more than his occasional visits, more than his careful courtesy. She wanted to build a life with him, to wake up beside him each morning, to share all the joys and sorrows that life would bring. In short, she was ready for him to court her, as he had proposed that day by the stream. The question was how to tell him. An opportunity presented itself the very next day when a letter arrived from Preston, delivered by a ranch hand. In it, he invited her to visit his ranch that Saturday, the first time he had extended such an invitation. "I'd like to show you my home," he wrote, "and introduce you to all my 4-legged friends. Thomas has offered his buggy if you'd feel comfortable driving yourself, or I can come fetch you if you prefer." Bethany penned her reply immediately, accepting the invitation and assuring him she was perfectly capable of handling the buggy herself. She had, after all, been taking driving lessons from Thomas on her occasional visits to the Henderson Ranch. Saturday dawned bright and clear, with just enough of a breeze to make the summer heat bearable. Bethany dressed with particular care in one of her new dresses, a cornflower blue that Mrs. Chen had assured her makes your eyes sparkle like jewels. She packed a basket with bread, cheese, and preserves as her contribution to lunch, then set off in Thomas's buggy with directions to Preston's ranch securely in hand. The journey took just under an hour, the road winding through rolling hills and stands of trees, before opening onto a vista that took Bethany's breath away. Preston's small spread, as he had modestly described it, was a well-maintained ranch nestled in a picturesque valley. A tidy white farmhouse stood surrounded by outbuildings, corrals, and paddocks where horses grazed contentedly. As she guided the buggy down the lane toward the house, Preston emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face lit up when he saw her, and he jogged over to meet the buggy. "You made it," he called, his smile wide and welcoming. "No trouble finding the place. Your directions were perfect," Bethany assured him as he helped her down from the buggy. "Preston, this is beautiful. You didn't tell me your small spread was so extensive." He looked almost embarrassed. "It's still modest compared to some of the big ranches around here, but it's home." "It's wonderful," Bethany said sincerely. Preston gave her a tour of the property, showing her the barn where his prized breeding stock was housed, the training corral where he worked with young horses, and the workshop where he crafted his own saddles and tack. His pride in what he had built was evident in every word, every gesture. "And this," he said finally, leading her toward the house, "is where I hang my hat." The house was smaller than Bethany's in town, but meticulously maintained. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a kitchen beyond and 2 bedrooms off to one side. Simple furnishings were arranged with an eye for comfort rather than fashion, but everything was clean and well ordered. "It's not fancy," Preston said, watching her reaction carefully, "but it suits me." "It's perfect," Bethany replied, meaning it. She could easily imagine life in this cozy house, adding her own touches to make it their home. Their home. The thought sent a thrill through her. They had lunch on the porch, enjoying the view and the gentle summer breeze. Afterward, Preston suggested they ride out to see the rest of his property. "I thought you might enjoy meeting Daisy," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "She's the gentlest mare I've ever trained, perfect for a beginner." Bethany hesitated. "I've never actually ridden a horse before, just in carriages or wagons." "There's no better time to learn," Preston encouraged. "And no safer place to try." With that logic, Bethany allowed herself to be persuaded. Preston brought out a dainty sorrel mare with a white blaze down her face, already saddled with what he explained was a lady's side saddle. "It belonged to Thomas's daughter before she moved to Denver," he explained. "He's been keeping it for when their granddaughters visit, but he said you're welcome to use it any time." With patient instruction and steady hands to support her, Preston helped Bethany mount and find her balance in the unfamiliar saddle. The sensation was strange at first, perched sideways instead of astride, but Daisy stood placidly, seemingly unbothered by her novice rider. "That's it," Preston encouraged as Bethany settled herself. "Now hold the reins like this, not too tight, just enough to feel her mouth." Under his guidance, Bethany learned the basics of controlling the horse with subtle shifts of the reins and her weight. When Preston declared she was ready to try moving, he mounted Rusty and led the way at a walk, with Daisy following docilely behind. They rode along the stream that formed the boundary between their properties, then up a gentle slope to a hilltop that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding countryside. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Preston said, as they dismounted to rest the horses. "You can see for miles in every direction." Bethany turned slowly, taking in the vastness of the Kansas prairie stretching to the horizon. In the distance, she could make out the church steeple in Wilson, and beyond that, the faint outline of the Henderson ranch. "It's like standing at the center of the world," she breathed. "That's exactly how I feel every time I come up here," Preston said, moving to stand beside her. "Like I can see everything that matters." Their eyes met, and Bethany knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. "Preston," she began, her heart pounding, "do you remember what you said to me that day by the stream about courting me properly when I was ready?" A flicker of hope crossed his face. "I remember." "I'm ready now," she said simply. For a moment, Preston seemed frozen in place, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Then, with deliberate movements, he closed the distance between them and took both her hands in his. "Bethany Walker," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "you have no idea how long I've been waiting to hear those words." "How long?" she asked, curious. A smile tugged at his lips. "Since the moment I pulled you from that overturned stagecoach." "That soon?" Bethany was astonished. "That soon," he confirmed. "There was something about you injured, exhausted, but still so determined, so brave. I think my heart recognized yours before my mind caught up." The poetic sentiment, so unexpected from the practical horseman, brought tears to Bethany's eyes. "May I kiss you?" Preston asked softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Please," she whispered. His lips met hers with gentle pressure, a first kiss that held both reverence and promise. Bethany felt as though she were floating and falling simultaneously, anchored only by Preston's hands holding hers. When they finally parted, she saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt. "I love you, Bethany," he said, the words simple yet profound. "I think I have since that first day." "And I love you," she replied, the declaration feeling like the most natural thing in the world. "More than I thought possible in so short a time." They remained on the hilltop for hours, talking, planning, dreaming together. Preston spoke of expanding his ranch, perhaps adding cattle to his horse breeding business. Bethany shared her vision for the school, the new programs she hoped to implement, the difference she wanted to make in her students' lives. "And your land," Preston said thoughtfully. "Have you decided what to do with it?" "I was thinking," Bethany replied, a smile playing at her lips, "that it might be nice if it were joined with yours someday. A way of expanding your ranch, perhaps?" Preston's eyes widened as he caught her meaning. "Bethany Walker, are you proposing to me?" she laughed, her cheeks flushing. "I suppose I am, in a roundabout way." "Well," he said, his expression growing serious, "much as I appreciate the sentiment, I had rather hoped to do the proposing myself." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." From the pouch, he drew a simple gold band set with a small, sparkling diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Pa gave it to me before he died, said it should go to the woman I choose to spend my life with." Bethany stared at the ring, then at Preston, hardly daring to believe this was real. "I know it's fast," he continued, suddenly looking uncertain. "And if you'd rather wait, I'll understand. But I love you, Bethany, and I want to build a life with you here, on this land, with our horses and maybe someday our children. I want to grow old watching you teach generations of Wilson's children to read and write and dream big dreams." Tears spilled down Bethany's cheeks as the full measure of his love washed over her. "Will you marry me?" Preston asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Bethany answered without hesitation. "Yes, Preston Davis, I will marry you." With trembling hands, he slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as though it had been made for her. Their second kiss was deeper than the first, sealed with promises and dreams of the future they would build together. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly mounted their horses to return to the ranch house. Tomorrow, Bethany would return to Wilson with news of their engagement. There would be arrangements to make, preparations for a wedding, decisions about where they would live. But for now, she was content to ride beside the man she loved, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. "I just realized something," she said as they approached the house, the setting sun painting it in golden light. "What's that?" Preston asked, glancing over at her. "You kept your promise," she said with a smile. "The day you rescued me, you said you'd take me anywhere, and you've taken me exactly where I was meant to be." Preston's answering smile held all the love and promise of their future together. "And that, Bethany Walker, soon to be Davis, is a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." 6 months later, on a crisp December day with snow dusting the prairie, Bethany Walker became Mrs. Preston Davis in a ceremony at Wilson's small church. The entire town turned out for the occasion, filling the pews and spilling out onto the steps. Ida Whittaker wept openly as she watched the young woman she had come to love as a daughter pledge her life to the man who had rescued her on that fateful spring day. Sarah Henderson, resplendent in her best dress, nudged her husband during the vows. "Didn't I tell you?" she whispered. "From the very first day I knew those two belonged together." Thomas merely smiled and patted her hand, having learned long ago that his wife was usually right about matters of the heart. After the ceremony, the celebration continued at the town hall, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the occasion. There was dancing, feasting, and much toasting to the health and happiness of Wilson's most beloved teacher and its respected horsemen. As the evening drew to a close, Preston led Bethany outside to where a sleigh waited, drawn by Rusty and decorated with bells and ribbons. "Your carriage awaits, Mrs. Davis," he said with a formal bow that made her laugh. "Where are you taking me this time, Mr. Davis?" she asked, eyes sparkling with happiness. Preston helped her into the sleigh, tucking warm blankets around her before taking the reins. With a soft command to Rusty, they set off into the moonlit night, the sleigh bells jingling merrily. "Anywhere you want to go," he replied, putting his arm around her shoulders and drawing her close. "For the rest of our lives." And as they glided across the snow-covered prairie toward the home they now shared, Bethany knew that her greatest adventure had only just begun. 3 years later, Bethany stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Preston teaching their 2-year-old son, William, how to feed a carrot to Daisy. The little boy's delighted laughter carried across the yard as the horse's velvety lips tickled his palm. "Careful there, son," Preston cautioned, his hand steady on the child's shoulder. "That's it, nice and flat." Bethany smiled, one hand resting on her rounded belly where their second child grew. Life had blessed them abundantly since that day when fate had overturned her stagecoach and sent Preston Davis riding to her rescue. The ranch had prospered, expanding to include the land Bethany had inherited and additional acreage they had purchased together. Preston's reputation as a breeder of fine horses had spread throughout Kansas and beyond, bringing buyers from as far away as St. Louis and Denver. Bethany had continued teaching until William's birth, then reluctantly resigned her position to focus on motherhood and helping with the ranch. But she hadn't abandoned her love of education twice a week. She held reading circles for neighboring ranch children too far from town to attend school regularly. As she watched her husband and son, Bethany reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The grief and loss that had sent her west, the terrifying accident that might have ended her life, the unexpected love that had given her a new beginning. "Mama, look," William called, having successfully fed Daisy without losing his fingers. "I did it, wonderful sweetheart." Bethany called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. Preston looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The love shining in his gaze, even after 3 years of marriage, still had the power to take her breath away. He whispered something to William, who nodded enthusiastically, then lifted the boy onto his shoulders and strode toward the house. "Mrs. Davis," Preston greeted her with a tip of his hat as they reached the porch. "Your men have returned from their important business." "So I see," Bethany replied solemnly, though her eyes danced with amusement. "And was your important business successful, Mr. William?" "Yes," the little boy declared proudly from his perch. "Daisy ate all my carrots." "And now this young cowboy is hungry himself," Preston added, swinging William down to the porch. "Aren't you, son? Cookies?" William asked hopefully, his eyes so like his father's looking up at Bethany imploringly. "After dinner," she promised, smoothing his unruly dark hair. "Why don't you go wash up while Papa and I talk for a moment?" Once William had scampered inside, Preston pulled Bethany into his arms, his hand gently caressing her belly. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Wonderful," she assured him. "Doctor Evans says everything is progressing perfectly. This little one is quite active, though I think we might have a daughter this time with a mind of her own." Preston chuckled. "Like her mother then." "Is that a complaint, Mr. Davis?" Bethany teased. "Never," he replied, brushing a tender kiss against her lips. "I thank God every day for giving me a wife with a mind of her own and the courage to use it." As they stood together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the sun set over the land they shared, Bethany felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. Life hadn't always been easy. There had been drought seasons, difficult births for the horses, occasional disagreements between two strong-willed people learning to share a life. But through it all, the love between them had only deepened, strengthened by challenges overcome together. "I love you, Preston Davis," she said softly, resting her head against his chest. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Bethany Davis," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "From the moment I found you in that overturned stage to this moment, to our last breath and beyond." Together, they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the Kansas sky in shades of gold and crimson. Another day was ending, but their story, the one that had begun with a crash and a promise, continued on, a testament to love found in the most unexpected of circumstances. Anywhere, Preston had promised her that day, and he had kept his word. He had taken her to the one place she had truly needed to go, home.